Aishlin, welcome to Collection Cutdown. Today's video is going to be 12 Rounds 2 starring Randy Orton. This movie is a sequel to 12 Rounds, which I reviewed last time. And by sequel I mean a remake because it is exactly the same premise and yet has none of the same people in it. I don't think any less of it for that. I mean, if you have a successful formula, why not go with it? I quite liked the first one, and so I do wonder if seeing this so soon after that will just make it seem like a pointless retread. Like I said for the first one, the plot of this movie is that he is this time a paramedic instead of a cop. And something happens and a psychopath kidnaps his girlfriend and makes him go through these 12 rounds of this puzzle that he has to solve in order to save her life. I do notice that I think the girlfriend is played by Cindy Busby in this, and I mentioned in the first one that Taylor Cole played the villain's girlfriend, and she's a Hallmark movie actor, and so Cindy Busby. So obviously that's a common thread for an actress's career: do a WWE movie and then go on to Hallmark. I actually don't remember many specifics about this film, so I'm fairly certain that early on in the film there's a scene where there is an overturned ambulance, maybe? It's like on the middle of a deserted road and there's possibly some kind of confrontation between him and the villain. Maybe that's at the end. Anyway, I have this image in my head of this deserted road and this ambulance on its side. Could just be entirely my own fiction, so let's do it. I was slightly wrong in my memory of the film. For example, the girlfriend, wife, she's his wife, she isn't actually kidnapped early on in the film. That happens much later. She's just threatened. But otherwise, I was right. I said that I remembered this visual of this ambulance overturned on a deserted track, and it was actually a car. And the reason that it's stuck in my memory is because it actually bookends the film, or a similar image. So the first scene features a car accident and there's an overturned car or two. And then right at the end there's also a different car accident. And so that's kind of why I guess that's stuck in my memory. I didn't think this one was as good as the first one. So I think Randy Orton is okay as an actor. I don't think he really detracted from it, even though he didn't really have much experience doing that. I do think that the plot was a little bit of a retread of the John Cena version. They did some different things with the sequences. They were quite, you know, unique to the film. Overall, I wasn't as invested in this. The action sequences weren't as impressive. So in the first movie you get a lot of like explosions and rappelling down buildings, and you know, that whole sequence on the trolley car was quite involved. In this one there's nothing really like that to kind of break up the monotony of the car chases and the driving here and there, and not as visually interesting. It just ended up suffering a little bit because of that. I guess it probably had a smaller budget, which would explain why they didn't go all out on that sort of stuff. I did like that there was the female cop character, so she was chasing Randy Orton's paramedic. The cops tended to think he was the bad guy because all this bad stuff was happening around him. But she was kind of the one thinking for herself and thinking, would the EMT want to do this? Would he have the resources to do this? So I liked that she was, you know, thinking for herself. And, you know, she was very capable, and I kind of wish that they shared more screen time. So she actually held a similar role to the Tamsin Outhwaite character in 7 Seconds, and I said that I quite liked her Tamsin's character in that. This was a similar sort of thing where it was a law enforcement agent chasing down the guy who the rest of the world thinks is a criminal, and she thinks, oh, maybe there's something more going on, and she does her own investigation. And the only difference in this one was it wasn't a flirtatious relationship. Sadly, the wife character wasn't as well drawn. The wife kind of mostly just stood around looking worried a lot. You never really get a sense of their life together or anything like that. The first movie, I sort of praised the idea that they were sort of on the outs a little bit before all this stuff happened, because it gave some emotional weight to the film, whereas in this their relationship seems fine, other than the fact that maybe his character has a few insecurities that he hasn't dealt with. They refer to a mistake, and I'm not actually sure whether his mistake was something that we never find out about, or whether that was referring to the accident scene at the beginning that is the inciting incident for everything that happens later. The bad guy turns out to be connected to that crash and what happened that night. I guess the point was that he saw his actions as a mistake, and then he was kind of meant to forgive himself. Maybe that was what they were going with, but that's not really what happened. He does his job, and it doesn't end perfectly. Somebody dies. But it wasn't through any fault of his own. When they referred to a mistake, him and his wife, that he did, it was a little bit confusing, because he spends the movie justifying what he did to the bad guy. So there was never any moment where he was like, yeah, I screwed up, you know. So I'm not quite sure what that referred to and what his arc was meant to be. I think that could have been better defined. It would have given some more emotion for him to actually have an arc like that, and I think it would have worked really well. But as it stood, I didn't really get the sense that they'd achieved that, or even if that's what they were going for. Like, I could just be giving them more credit. That mistake might have been something else. The other hint maybe is that, like, at one point he steals a car. When the kid he's with says, oh, how do you know how to do that? He says, oh, I was a stupid kid once too, or I made mistakes, or something like that. So that line about how he'd made a mistake might have referred to that, but then that was never really clarified, so you don't know anything about his past or his backstory. So I said in the first movie, I know that I'm comparing it a lot to the first movie, and it definitely suffers in that comparison, so I feel a bit bad about it, but they are a package deal together, so, you know, I don't feel that bad. In the first movie, I said that John Cena's character, there was this sequence at the beginning that sort of sets up his skills and drive that then makes him an appropriate hero for the rest of the film. Like, you can see how he would be capable of doing all that stuff, and this movie doesn't have that. He's shown to be a good EMT. That doesn't explain, like, the sort of out-of-the-box thinking required to solve these puzzles, or the sort of G-Man action stuff. I was waiting for them to reveal that he was ex-military or something, or the mistake that he made referred to something like that, but no. There were a few other things that I wasn't that keen on. For example, there was this random sex scene, I guess, very frenetic and weirdly shot and out of place, and like, it's not even with the main character, and the whole thing just is pointless. So it just really smacks of you know, trying to get some nudity into the film for no reason. Like, in no way does it need to be there, and it doesn't add anything, and it's, you know, not really sexy anyway, so I didn't really like that at all. Another thing I wanted to mention, when it cuts to the sort of present day after this car accident in the beginning, he's talking to his wife and it's morning, so they're eating breakfast, and then it, you know, a little bit of time passes, but then suddenly it's evening, and he's still on shift with his partner. So that was obviously a very long shift, which, okay. But it really felt like a random switch from day to night, particularly because in that breakfast scene, she says, oh, don't forget, we've got that dinner tonight. And then that's never paid off. Like, there's never a moment where she's annoyed because he didn't show up to the dinner, or, because I was expecting that to be maybe a conflict thing where, because it was clear that he was quite reluctant to go to that. So I was waiting for this moment where she's like, oh, he's piped out and, isn't going to come and has, ruined my night or whatever. And, cut to him trying to save the world. And then for them to sort of repair that when she realizes he's got more going on. But there was never any follow-up to that. It was just they said, yeah, it was the dinner thing, and then she seemed to spend she was sleeping and then she wasn't sleeping, and I guess what I'm saying is that the timeline was very confusing. Like, maybe his night shift was on a different day, because this whole film was set in one night, and it was at night, like it was all dark. There were actually some funny bits that I laughed at. He hits this hotel clerk because he needs to get through, because he's on a time limit for these puzzles, and he kind of hurts the guy and then is apologizing and giving medical advice as he's kind of backing away, and that made me laugh. And I kind of wish that they'd kept that thread, that every time he hurt somebody, he would apologize and yell medical advice as he was fleeing, because it would have helped with that whole illustration of his character thing that I was talking about, because as it stands, he's quite a 2D kind of guy, but if he was first and foremost an EMT and felt guilt anytime he hurt somebody, it would have given some levity to the film. So there were some funny moments in it, and I think that did help brighten the film, but I wish there was more. I wish that they'd sort of leaned into that a bit more. I think it would have helped establish the film as a different tone to the first one, but that's just my opinion, and I've said before on record that I prefer action movies not to take themselves too seriously, so maybe that's just my personal taste. Overall, not as successful as the first one. It's not terrible. All the actors are fine. It looks fine. I think a little bit more thought could have been put into it. 12 Rounds 2, not as good as the first one, but, still worth seeing, particularly if you like the genre and like wrestlers and the movies they make and all of that sort of stuff. So certainly wouldn't necessarily advise you to skip it. Just, be warned that if you like the first one, this one's not quite as good. So the question is, am I going to keep this Blu-ray? And I will admit that there was always a higher chance that I would keep it because I was intending to keep the first one. I like to keep collections together if I can. I think that this would be a much harder choice for me if it was just a standalone film and not part of a universe of sequels and such. Yes, I'm going to keep it. I don't think it's a terrible film, but I don't think it's good enough that I would have kept it on its own. But if I see 12 Rounds 1 again, I will probably rewatch this one as well, just to kind of get that complete picture. So my next film that I'm reviewing is not, in fact, 12 Rounds 3, because there is one that stars Dean Ambrose this time, and the reason is because I am bitter that they changed the rules of the universe. The 12 rounds in that one refers to 12 rounds in a gun, and I just am annoyed. Because why do a sequel if you're just going to throw out everything that makes that universe unique? Why not just do an action movie that has nothing to do with either of those movies? I'm not, saying that I'll never get the DVD or Blu-ray of number 3, particularly because, I would like to have a collection. But not unless I find it super, super cheap. as I said, 12 Rounds 3, not the next movie. The next movie is 13th Warrior, starring Antonio Banderas. So this is going to be a fun one because I think I have very wrong memories of what this is, and I'll talk a little bit about that in that video. I hope you'll join me for that one, and for now, goodbye and thank you for watching.